So once again, everyone is welcome to another edition of a seminar under the Institute of African Studies seminar series. The Institute of African Studies is here at the University of Ghana in Legon. Today, we are very excited to have this conversation, to have this meeting happen. Mjiba Frehiwot, my colleague and friend, will eventually introduce Olive, who will take us through what we anticipate to be a really very interesting presentation. Mjiba Frehiwot, Dr. Mjiba Frehiwot is a research fellow here at the Institute of African Studies. She's your ideal academic of the 21st century. She's very good in organizing events, research, publication, and then also a filmmaker. I mean, like everything rolled into one. And as soon as she starts moderating this event, all of those will become apparent. So we are very excited to have a moderate, direct chair this event. Dr. Frehiwot, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mjiba. I'm not sure if I'm an ideal academic, but I'll take it. So I'm excited to moderate this event. And I just want to kind of tell us what we're going to do and then turn it directly over to our presenter. Today, we're going to have a discussion and film, which I think is extremely exciting because oftentimes we do not connect, film with discussions in an academic setting like this. So I'm super excited about this. The film is titled, "What Good is Freedom If We Haven't Learned to Be Free?" which I think is also extremely timely because we're talking about decolonizing knowledge production. We're talking about, liberatory education in higher education, across the continent. And then, of course, freedom is always on the minds of African people globally, right? And so our presenter and filmmaker is going to walk us through sort of what that looks like. And then we're also going to watch the film. So her abstract, the freedom to self-determination, to self-determine begins in the imagination. We create the world we dream of. Following a screening of my short film, and actually to speak and then screen the film, Troublemaker, a discussion on the role of storytelling as an act of freedom. She will walk us through what she thinks freedom is in relationship to imagination. Troublemaker is an 11-minute film produced in 2019. It follows a young boy, Obi, on a hot day in Eastern Nigeria as he learns that actions have consequences. It is a coming-of-age story about masculinity, violence, and the effects of war on community and across generations. So Olive Nwosu, and please correct me because I have a problem pronouncing like everyone's name. So one, don't be offended, and then two, correct me. Was born in Lagos, Nigeria. She is a 2020 BAFTA Pigot Scholar, an Alex Shivel Fellow at Columbia University School of Arts, and African Promises Director selected by the Institut Francis, and a 2022 Sundance Screening Fellow. So I know you all are already like super excited because we know Sundance is the epitome of film. Olive has written and directed 2 award-winning short films, Troublemaker, awarded a 2020 NBR Student Award and now streaming on the Criterion Channel, and Igun, Masquerade, which screened at TIFF 2020 and Sundance 2022, and was nominated for Best British Short Film at the British Independent Film Awards. Olive is currently developing 2 feature film projects with Film 4 and the BBC. Again, we can see that she's a real deal, which is why I told Chika I just happen to make a film. Her work is informed by the intersectional nature of her life across multiple continents and identity. Her mission is to tell urgent, cinematic, African-centered stories. Olive, the floor is yours, and you're welcome to the Institute of African Studies seminar series.
Thank you so much. I really want to thank you for inviting me, specifically to thank Dr. Mjiba. And thank you, Mjiba, for that incredible introduction. For me, honestly, to be in community and conversation with others who are involved in African studies and thought is so important to me, to engage in my practice with you, and really to share with you what filmmaking and more generally storytelling and art is to me in the context of African life, in the context of African knowledge creation, and in the context of African progress. These are the constructs that I engage with in my work. These are the lenses through which I create characters and worlds. And to begin, I really want to, first of all, as a storyteller, start by telling you my own story, which is of a young girl in Lagos who could not dream of the truth of what my life is now. And I say this often because it really feels like the jumping off point when I think about freedom. It never occurred to me as a child that I could make films. It felt so out of the realm of what was possible to my mind and in my world. And I don't think that this is a coincidence. Growing up around me, as I'm sure many of you know, I knew doctors and lawyers, I knew engineers and teachers. This was the middle class of Nigeria. I also knew drivers and plumbers and traders. And yet there was a real absence of artists in my world. And when all the books I read and all the films I watched were made by people who lived oceans away, how could I have imagined that I too, a Nigerian girl, could grow up to become an African filmmaker? The stories we tell ourselves can limit us. It wasn't until I got to America to study engineering naturally that I took my first film class. And that really was a revelation. I learned that filmmaking provides tools, very powerful ones, to communicate, to express, to investigate, to tell people things and make them feel. And that really is a weapon. And it's a way to create connections, to reveal the similarities in humanity, the injustices of inequality, and to imagine a better society. These are the things I learned at school. And yet still, the story I had grown up with was so powerful that I couldn't break free just yet. It was hard to believe that I could make films as a career, and that felt impossible to justify, that decision. It felt indulgent, something for the Americans and the British, but not for a Nigerian girl. What good is freedom if we haven't learned to be free? So instead, I studied economics and I went and worked in finance like a good African daughter. And I was unhappy. I wasn't sure how working for a big investment bank was building African society. We were raising more capital for those who already had enough. And I was entrenched in supporting a system that was creating more inequality. The truth is, I had never felt further away from the streets of the city I grew up in. So I quit that and I went to do a master's in psychology. That felt like a decent compromise, something in between, truer to my humanity, but still something I could explain to my family and friends that they could understand. I did my research in human trauma, specifically in trauma in Nigerian society. And what I found really was a revelation. We are traumatized people. Every day, life throws difficulty at us, and many of us don't have the language to heal all the time. We swallow our pain, we accept our suffering, and our history is fraught with generational trauma that as a society, we have not yet resolved. And we are so resilient. We've had no choice but to learn to be. It really is something incredible to me how so many of us wake up every day and get on with life. And yet getting on with life is not the same thing as living. This is what really finally set me forward towards pursuing the thing I had always wanted. It took my understanding how I had learned to compromise, to accept what was, to live fearfully because a different, better future seemed impossible. Where did I learn this narrative? And I can't pretend I'm not fortunate. I was born into a middle-class Nigerian family and given the best education there was. And still, I was too afraid to truly live this purpose, to embrace the freedom to choose. It took 5 years after graduating from university for me to go back and study for a master's in fine art in filmmaking. At 26, finally, I realized that there are stories of home, of people who look and feel and sound like me that I must tell. There are possibilities to create. So I left my job in London, I applied to Columbia University and traveled to New York to begin a new journey. And here we are some years later, finally making films. I tell this story because it is a story of self-determination. This is what I know. And the films I make are about this drive, this need, this necessity to self-define. I believe freedom is this, the freedom from and freedom to self-define. I believe Nigerians and Africans need to self-define, to cast off old definitions that we have inherited, definitions that we did not come up with ourselves, that came from foreign places. In order to move forward, we must process our past, reclaim it, reshape it, our history, and imagine a new future. The grails of our ancestors have been lost. They played an important role as keepers of our wisdom and our antiquity. In a regard, we've been robbed of a collective memory, and it will take an internal process of decolonizing our minds, a ruthless discipline in investigating history, past mistakes, and grievances. This is what my film Troublemaker is about. Troublemaker tells the story of a day in the life of a young boy in a village in Eastern Nigeria, an Igbo boy, a descendant of the Biafran War, who does not know his own story. He sees his grandfather every day, sitting mute under a mango tree, and Obi, our protagonist, can feel his grandfather's story. He can feel the weight of history on his village, on his family, on his young 10-year-old shoulders, but he does not know. He cannot understand because he has not been taught. My own father was 8 years old when the Biafran War began. Obi begins to prod, like all children do. He asks questions, he disturbs, rebelling against the unsustainable peace of repression. This is the mind of the inquisitive child, and it is a gift. Obi stumbles on something he does not expect, his grandfather's trauma. It turns out that Papa isn't actually mute, just silent, unable to speak of the atrocities of war. A war he has since retreated from into a self-inflicted muteness for decades. The symbolism feels apt. Growing up as an Igbo girl, I learned so little about the war. In school, we were taught nothing. It's infinitely perplexing that I had to leave my country to learn my history. Why is it that we do not speak of our own past? 50 years later, as we continue to live in its consequences, why does the curriculum not address the Nigerian Civil War as a compulsory topic? Where is the national narrative on this war, on the brutality of it, of its consequences to millions, on the way it continues to shape the political landscape of Nigeria today? Where are the memorials to the millions of people who died, 1 million Biafran children who starved to death? Where are the lessons that we learned? How can we grow if we do not answer these questions? What are we so afraid to find? It takes the curiosity of a child to break a grandfather's silence. In Troublemaker, it is a shocking moment and a really painful one when finally Obi's grandfather speaks, heaving out history. But I argue that it is the first step of healing, this confrontation with the past, this experience of emotion. It is only through this process that a transcendence into the present is possible, the transcendence that makes space for the new. Trauma psychology knows this. The post-traumatic victim is the one that cannot recount his story, cannot relive it. He's frozen in a memory, too painful and unsafe, unable to create a new construct that allows him to move forward. The experience is too traumatizing, too scary to be relived. And the body keeps the score. Bessel van der Kolk uses recent scientific advances to show how trauma literally reshapes both body and brain, compromising sufferers' capacities for pleasure, engagement, self-control, and choice. A traumatized person has problems with memory, with trusting, and with forming new relationships with others and the world in front of them. Problems with engaging openly. She has lost control. She has lost the ability to choose. She has lost her freedom. I believe that this is where art comes in. Art dwells in the space of the child's mind, our beginner's mind, a mind curious, free of past and future, entering each moment with a holy innocence and a holy truth. Art necessitates this. It necessitates that we ask questions of who we are and where we come from, why things are the way they are, what else can be possible. This is the way we create new worlds, by drawing from what was and imagining anew. First, in safe spaces where we are free to envision new paradigms, that is, in art, where we can embody the yet unreal and make it real, where we can recreate the past to allow us relive it safely and overcome, where we can meet ourselves on the page, in the image, on the screen, in the rhythm of music. In art, we imagine a new future, and then we investigate its possibility in the real world, in institutions like this one, through rigorous research and discussion, through science, in our political institutions, through inspired policy, in the commercial world, where new ways of organizing and producing, sustainable ways, community-centered ways, and I would argue that these are African ways, are implemented. This is the work of freedom. And it is my work, the work of the storyteller. In 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, Professor Yuval Noah Harari, the Israeli historian, writes that all stories are in essence about the victory of the mind over matter. Let us remember that the victory of the mind over matter. In other words, to overcome. All stories are about overcoming, about possibility, about hope. They dwell in the desire for self-determination, the desire for freedom, a freedom from and a freedom to. If this is the case, then storytelling gives power back to its tellers. It insists on meaning making, even in the midst of chaos. I think this is so powerful. When governments are corrupt and young men are hopeless, so hopeless they take to violence, stories assert the value of life, all life, intrinsically, despite what we have been told, despite what we see around us. To tell one story is to have agency, to affirm one's humanity. It is crucial and critical work, a tool to deconstruct the past and how we learn to be free. Troublemaker then really ends at a new beginning. Now that Obi has forced his grandfather to break his long silence, what next? His mother asks him, "What am I to do with you?" Is Obi hero or villain? Is his grandfather a victim of his grandson or of something much larger than all of them that looms? What happens next? It's a crucial question, and one that I leave to the imagination of the audience. I believe good film does this. It collaborates with its viewers to envision a future. It is a film that gives us that freedom. With this, I would love us to watch the film and then we can discuss some more. But thank you so much, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you. Can I just make sure you can see?
So Olive, we can see a black screen. We can't see there's no images.
Okay, 1 second. I will try again.
Obi, rapụ mpa nnukwu gị aka. Obi. Obi, ka ife ị na-eme n'elu? Ọ, ya gakwuru nwanne gị nwoke n'azụ ụlọ.
Good morning. Kenyo. Kebe Emeka. Emeka. Onye maka ị na-emela mkpọtụ ba n'ime ka ifu Emeka ebe ahụ.
Emeka, Obi, ka ị na-emere m ihe a? Emekwana m ihe ahụ ọzọ.
Mega jababo.
Adị m aga.
Mega jababo.
Mba, adị m aga. Ka ị na-emere m ihe a?
Mega jababo.
Emezina ya, adị m aga.
Mega biscuit.
Hey! Nakato.
Hey!
Yum. Ikaw din yum.
Nga gutel.
Oh, one hour ago tell me.
Hindi mo gutel.
Come on first.
Oyo basagni.
That's not good. When was no quarter, got on my, I know me a joke. Then the full of gog, Kaborgo. A man bomb no better. But what I do have beginning. Come on, when was no quarter, no got on my, what I know. When it was no quarter, on my. Yeah, I came to tell her, and I'm not. I'm going to do one. Go, near my cargo. Near my cargo. No, what is it? Oh, my cargo. Huh? In a community, my year. Huh?
Now I'm bobbing like in a potential window, brother. Can I measure? And I'm quiet. Good water, and I know I am better keep up with Okunoka. But now on. Obna, Una.
Dewo.
Kaya kana. Kaya kana kita. Otuka kana ba adi ko nothing we on na. Since season abo na leba.
Or expert.
Respect ngin.
Obi. No. Obi ndo. Oga wal knockout. Well, no. Well, okay. Obi ndo no. Ndo.
Hey, nepanka na one day we went knock on.
Obi.
Hey!
Panuku me bezne na chukwu nonso. Ezigbo papa nnukwu 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 me bezne na chukwu nonso. Obi ka ihe dị ife ahụ. Obi ifugi ife kosulu. Ka ihe bụ ife nke biko Obi ka ife ji m ikwu n'ife anyị mere na Obi
So that's the film. And yeah, I would love to have a conversation about it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Olive. And I am sure everyone can agree that both your presentation was dynamic and it set the stage for the power of film, and also how we can use film to do multiple things, right? From what I got both from the film and also from your presentation was, you know, we can use film to tell stories. We can talk about our history. We can talk about collective trauma. We can even make plans for the future, right? We can tackle multiple issues, which in watching your film, I identified several issues that I think could potentially be discussed, although perhaps they weren't the focus of your film, right? And so I have a couple questions, but I want the audience to have the opportunity to come in with their questions. So if you have a question, audience, please, I ask you to, you know, put up your hand symbol, and then you can open, you know, your mic and speak. While the audience is getting ready, let me ask a question or two to get the juices flowing, if that's fine with you. So one of the things that you spoke about in your opening remarks was the power of film, and how as a young, you know, girl growing up in Lagos, you weren't really exposed to filmmakers, or perhaps you weren't aware of filmmakers, or perhaps that wasn't a legitimate, quote unquote, profession, right, for a young middle class Nigerian woman. And so I was just wondering if you can talk a bit about how film can be used as a way to engage sort of the people being the larger Africa, you know, global Africa, right? All of us everywhere, both, you know, internationally and also locally, in order for them to become change makers in their communities, right? So, and also for development. There were a few moments in the film, which I'm sure everyone would agree with me, that are challenges that many of us are facing today on the continent, right? So how do you think that film can push sort of the everyday African wherever to recognize their power, right? That they're, you know, not objects, but subjects in their own life, right? And they can then become the change that they want to see. So that's the first question while folks are getting themselves together. And the second question has to do with historical trauma, which I'm very glad that you centered this film around historical trauma, right? I'm wondering, how do you think that film can help, you know, globally African people deal with historical trauma? We have a lot of them, right? We have the war, we've got civil wars on the continent, we've got the transatlantic slave trade, the Arab Islamic slave trade, neocolonialism, colonialism. We've got it all, you know. How do you think that film can help us deal with that historical trauma? And also, how do you think that not dealing with the historical trauma, since you mentioned that you went to psychology through, you know, a psychology program, is hindering us as African people from forward movement? So I'm gonna let you go ahead and get into those questions. I'm gonna ask our audience, pop up your hands, throw something in the chat, and then we can have a robust conversation. Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. No, these are really great questions. I'll start with the first one, which I believe is about how people can use film to create agency for themselves and tell their stories, which ultimately I think is its power. It's interesting. Film is an interesting medium. You know, it's different from prose. It's different from music because inherently it costs more money, right? You need usually a camera, you need the occasions. I mean, historically, the camera alone was the big cost. And it's not a coincidence that for a long time, the continent didn't have a lot of its own cinema. You know, cinema was invented in the West, and, you know, they had these 100-kilogram cameras that they would, you know, transport around. And so that has had inhibitions. And I think that is a lot of why cinema took some time to blossom on the continent, where we have a rich history of literature, of theater, even of radio plays, for example, in Nigeria. Cinema took some time. And in fact, I think that the fact that Nollywood exists as it does is really, and I'll talk about this more, but it's really a paradigm to what accessible filmmaking can look like. I think Nollywood is really the first industry that was so improvisational in its creation. It was, young men with, like home cameras shooting films in 3 days with their friends. When you recognize that that's its history and how it's grown into what it is today, it's really quite incredible. And so I think actually that people are already doing it, and it's a fascinating question because there's a love-hate relationship between, I would say, cinema and content. I think we live in the world of content, and there's this real tension between the two. But I don't think that has to exist. I think actually that there's a democratization that happens when now so many do own cameras, right? The 100-kilogram camera has become a square on a phone. And you find all the time, young people, they are telling their stories, they are, and my film, took a cast and a crew, and that takes some money, but when people make their dance videos and when people, I don't know, there's the cry saying, I'm here, I think that is what a film really is. It's like, I'm here, I exist, and all humans have that desire. And I think that is really, in essence, what matters. So fundamentally, I think actually that access is more true today than it's ever been. But in terms of the industry of film, right, which has the luxury of, being considered, of having a budget, of building worlds, creating sets. I think people are always amazed by how many people it takes to make, a regular film. It takes hundreds of people. And it's not, it's true that with Hollywood films, budgets are $50 million. That's when you think about how much money that is, it's a huge amount of money. And so I think slowly over time, we are building our own platforms and our own stages to do a similar thing. It takes time, and it is taking time. An industry like Nollywood is growing. My argument is that it's a question then of the stories we choose to tell. And that, I think, leads into your second question around, how film can help us, deal with trauma and tell our history. And I think it really begins with the understanding of the real role of the storyteller, a respect for that role, and the creation of space for that role. We had our griots for centuries, and they played such a pivotal role in communities. They were keepers of our history. They told stories of possibility. They held wisdom. And I think when we begin to give space to the film storyteller in the same way, and now I speak specifically of Nollywood, which I know best of, who really is the screenwriter fundamentally. Screenplays in Nollywood are written so quickly, they're almost kind of like the quick thing, and then we make the film. But actually, the story, everything lives and dies on that story. And I think when we give it, real power and agency to the screenwriter, to the artist, to dig into history, to mirror real society, not just the wealthy, not just kind of aspirational. There's an aspirational wealth that I think is so logged in Nollywood that really, is the story of the 1%. When I think we need to remember the value of all the other stories that exist, and begin there.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that response. I think it really sort of woke us up and gave us some more things to think about, right? particularly with the use of film, both its limitations, sort of the financial, limitations, as well as the power though, right? So, and also the dichotomy or even the contentious relationship sometimes between film and content. So thank you very much. So we have two questions. Professor Essie Sutherland Adi, we're going to go ahead and bring you in. And Teets, I'm so sorry about the pronunciation. Please, after Prof goes, open your mic and bring in your contribution. Prof, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Olive, thank you for your presentation and your evocative film. I was just wondering, I've been on another sort of set of panels where the Biafran experience seems to be popping up again among scholars, and I was just wondering, what do you think is causing that, or what's the background to that at this time? But the second one is, what are your outlets? We listen to conversations around filmmaking and popular art and so on in Ghana, and often it's like, oh, we're giving the audience what they want, and so that's why we're not doing other stories and so on. I don't know what your experience has been and how difficult it has been to share your work, particularly at home. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Those are great questions. In response to your first, I think two things. The first is that, it was recently the 50th anniversary of the war. And I think that really, spurred kind of a desire to look back at it and to reconcile ourselves with that past. But to be honest, I also, and this is my feeling, think that Nigeria is really at a pivotal moment. It really feels like the ethnic and religious tensions that have always existed, are at a forefront. I think for a couple of reasons. Whenever there's economic decline, I think there's always an amount of instability, and I also think that there really feels like a fed-upness with the same story over and over and over again. And also the realities of, increased access to guns and to armory that many kind of young men and militia in the country now have. And so I think people are really seeing, in a way they haven't, what these tensions look like. There are bombings in churches, there are, raids on trains, there are, herdsmen who were killing other villages, and the urgency feels very real. And I think when the present is so fraught, often we look to the past for answers, and you can trace the thread between where we are today and the past. And so I think it's important work actually to trace that thread and to understand the real structural and ongoing themes within the country. And that's my take on why this conversation is happening now. And in response to your second question, really that is one of the big challenges, is where the work gets seen. For me, it's one of the harder things. I make my films in Nigeria. I make my films for a Nigerian and African audience and the diaspora, first of all, and yet my films are screened mostly in Europe and America. And when Mjiba was reading my long list of, fellowships and whatnot, they all are from Western bodies, and that is a problem. So what is the solution? I think it's structural. I think the the film industry struggles with the same challenges that many of the other industries on the continent do. I think actually that I feel some optimism as the streamers, whatever we think of them, are making space on the continent, the Netflixes and Amazons of the world. Even though those are not African institutions, they are beginning to look at the African audience as a real audience and to create platforms for African films to be watched by African people. And I think actually that people also are innovative, you know. There are small pop-up festivals that are happening, at least in Nigeria, I know that. My films have screened in some festivals in South Africa, in Benin, in Ghana. So it's not enough, but it's something. And moving forward, that really is one of the things that's close to me, is how do we make the work more accessible? And how do we create also a pipeline of new storytellers to make the work as well?
Thank you.
Perfect. Oh, sorry, Auntie Essie, go ahead.
No, I just said thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So we're going to take 2 more questions. We have Tsitsi and Edwin Ajay. They're going to go ahead and bring their questions in, and then all of you'll go ahead and respond. Is that fine? Perfect. So the floor is yours.
It's Tsitsi Sachikonye. First of all,
thank you very much.
Yeah, Olive, I really congratulate you for such an amazing film. It's very touching and very engaging. I think you were in South Africa. Was it at the Durban International Film Festival, DIF?
Yeah, my film screened there.
Yeah. Because you know you're affiliated with the Institut Français, which basically does support that. I wanted you to maybe link up with Veronique Tadjo. She's from Ivory Coast, and she's very well connected in terms of building you up as a filmmaker. She's actually a writer, and she's written quite a tremendous sort of body of work that does deal with trauma and that does deal with pre-colonial times. So that is something that would really motivate you and move you forward. I wanted to say that with trauma fiction, I'm more into genocide fiction. And what I liked about your film was it's very immediate. It's very visceral, and the body language is there. And also the Nigerian language is there. A lot of the times people who in Africa are illiterate, especially in Nigeria. So that touches very much on connecting with the audience, so to speak. My first question is, therefore, in terms of the actual prose, would you think that in terms of representing trauma, there's that silence in prose, there's that invisibility, there's that aspect where when you read trauma, it's hidden. It's when you read trauma fiction, prose, it's rather hidden. Do you think that that ties in with your screenwriting? Did you experience that when you were screenwriting? And then my second question is, given that you're talking about hundreds of people involved in filmmaking and it being expensive or difficult to find funding, would you consider actually doing graphic novels? It's imagist, and there's still that stillness that's there, that's captured there. I wanted to refer to Aya de Yopignon, which is also a graphic novel done by what was her name? Abue. And would you consider actually doing your work as graphic novels in case you can't find funding for films?
I've never considered the graphic novel.
Oh, Olive, give us just a moment so we can take Dr. Ajay's point and then we can do a wrap up. So we can, thank you. Sorry about that. Please, Dr. Ajay.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mjiba. And thank you, Oli, for an insightful presentation. I really enjoyed, especially the video. I have only two questions which are really linked. You mentioned that your films were mostly not being accessed on the continent. And the first thing I would like to ask is, how do we make it accessible so that people on the continent can have access to it? And especially when it comes to using it as an approach to teaching, to teaching of literature. And if we are to use these materials to teach, how do we get access to them as scholars so that we can easily propagate this gospel or this share this message with our students? So that the two are linked, but I hope you get me. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, here I am again. Can we take one more question? Because I think we have a third question, which will just round us up. Aseye, please, are you ready to come in?
Yes, I am. Hi, Oli. Thanks for the film. It's really, really great. For me, I'm just intrigued. Most of the films I've watched on Biafra, most of the time have been feature length.
Sorry, I'm struggling to hear you.
Can you hear me, please?
Yes, it's better.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so congratulations on your film. Very beautiful work. And my question, not actually, my comments before the question is that most of the films I've watched on Biafra coming from Nigeria mostly have been feature-length films. A couple were made in mainstream Nigeria industry before Half of a Yellow Sun was adapted for the screen, etc. And I'm intrigued that, the story about Biafra is so big, yet you've been able to, capture a piece of it, but it hits a nerve and a chord, and it makes so much sense. Yet it's a short film. What were your challenges in trying to do a short out of such a big subject, and also the fact that it's something that is always on the table for conversation? What were your challenges? Did you intend to do a feature and change it to a short? How did the whole process happen, and how did you arrive at this?
Yeah, thank you. I'll start with that one. I always knew it would be a short film, and you're right. I mean, there's so many stories within the story of the Biafran War. So for me, it was important to be very specific in my take on it and in the angle that I wanted to explore. I really feel that specificity actually is a great way to deal with a bigger general theme, and actually, as Mjiba was saying, how to allow for certain kind of subtext and other secondary narratives that might not be the kind of main plot of the film, but it just exists in the space. And I think audiences can notice and feel without kind of the plot being specifically about that. So that was my approach. I always knew I wanted it to be really about intergenerational trauma. For me, the argument is that, history is always relevant, and so it is present in the everyday. And so I wanted to have a grandfather, a parent and a son, and really, dwell in that space, and the silence of the war and how that is felt regardless, because again, that was my experience. Like I said, my father was a boy during the war, and yet we never spoke about it at home. He would say a thing or two infrequently, but it wasn't something that was discussed. It felt hushed and like a secret, dangerous. And my question was why, and I think that's where the film comes from. And that I think is also in a way my response to the question of how trauma is dealt with in other media, because often it's this secret. Traumatic events are often they're kept secret, or actually cognitively they're they're locked in the mind, and that is why they're so difficult to move forward from, because humans integrate their experiences fully and then they move on. But when you can't integrate an experience, then you're stuck almost in that loop. You continue to feel the danger and the trauma of it all. That's what PTSD is. And I think it's interesting, prose and film are different because prose can very much dwell in the inner life of a character, right? That is its strength. Whereas a film deals in images. And so inner lives are, in a way, more absent. But then that's interesting when you think about trauma, because if a person has an arrested inner life, then they are silent, and that's how the grandfather shows up on screen. And yeah, in terms of the material, the best, often, I mean, reaching out to filmmakers, I find is a way to get the work. People have reached out to me, and I'm always happy to share the work in places where there isn't a platform where it exists. So this film is on the Criterion channel in the US, which means if you're in the US, you can go and watch it there. And the Institut Français have a copy of it that they have in their archives. And these are the challenges between, you know, Africa and Europe, but the French actually, I think, have such an appreciation of cinema, and they actually toured this film and a few others around France in schools, to teach in schools, to teach to students there. But yes, reaching out to the filmmakers, I would say, looking also at Canopy. I don't know how it works exactly in different regions, but Canopy is a website, an archive of film, specifically for educational purposes. So often work that's deemed as something that could be used in educational spaces is housed there and can be accessed. But yeah, there's a lot more to be done, and I think that touches on some of what I spoke about earlier in that regard. And finally, I don't really know anything about graphic novels, so I haven't thought about making work with that. But it's interesting, right? Because the step before you shoot a film is the storyboard, and storyboard means literally drawing out each scene and placing the characters in it to feel what the film will be like when you shoot it. So in a way, it's a graphic novel that then gets translated to motion. But they are different media, and my interest is in film and in really playing with time, which is the thing that film does so well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This is a really exciting and engaging conversation. I've got 3 more questions for you, so I'm going to take them. I'm going to add a 4th, and then we'll see if we can get another round. So we have Na Ase, and I'm so sorry, sister. Chika C. I can't get the surname. I can barely get the first name. I'm sorry. I have a problem pronouncing names. It's my hang up. I do apologize. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. So before they bring in their questions, and they'll come in the order that their hands are raised, I wanted to throw my question in there about this notion of the culture of silence. You spoke about the grandfather's silence, right? And you know, Paulo Freire has this, and I'm sure it's not just his, but he has this notion of the culture of silence, and he speaks about oppressed people and repressed people, you know, ultimately finding themselves in the culture of silence. So I was wondering if if you can add to the questions, you know, this, why you felt the symbolism of silence should be central to this film. And then the other thing I thought it's interesting that you've got 3 generations: the grandfather, the mother, and the son. Where's the father? Does that play into anything? So those are just some questions that I have. The floor is open for our 3 questions. Nah, please take it over.
All right, thank you very much, Olive. That was a very, very interesting account on the impact of transgenerational, trauma, as well as a telling of the Biafra story that also departs from the familiar names, Ojukwu, Gowon, and the familiar dates. So thank you very much for this. My question is very brief. It's about how film on specific issues like this can transcend across spaces in global Africa. Thank you very much.
Please, next question.
Hi.
Okay.
Was it me or somebody else?
It's a say is next.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
So, Olive, I just want to know if so historically, African filmmaking really has happened in layers, where people have told stories because they wanted to tell stories, and there was the intentional filmmaking where certain pioneer filmmakers thought that they had to correct misrepresentations about African people and also create new narratives, etc. And so some African filmmakers think that there's this burden that they carry, that you're supposed to make films a certain way if you're an African filmmaker, which for starters, some people don't want to be called African filmmakers. Two, they just want to be called filmmakers. Two, the fact that they're African filmmakers, there's this, thinking, expectation that there's a certain story you have to tell. Hence, sometimes when people tell stories differently, they are criticized. Yet again, when we look at Nollywood, people are quick, and even the video era in Ghana and in Nigeria, there's a quick dismissal of that same time as well in the work that was done, and the burden just keeps piling up as to what story to tell, how to tell it, why it should be told. And there are those who have said, and I think Prof had made ask something similar, but there are those who also think that beyond telling stories, there's a bread and butter issue as well, and then there's also that how can you find a balance being, for lack of a better word, commercial and also being socially conscious. But I think that if you also take time to thoroughly study some majority of the films that have been made on the continent, even though sometimes it's for commercial purposes as well, there's always some social issue there being tackled. But over the years, we are realizing that it's becoming a burden, as to what story to tell when you're coming from the continent. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever been asked any of those questions? And you yourself, what are your thoughts about that? Thank you.
Okay, last question.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I actually like what Essay was saying, because if it's not, if it's art for art's sake, it becomes to an extent entertainment, and it's not as historical and informative as you've made it. It's not engaged, so to speak. I wanted to also add Elaine Scarry. She wrote about how it's impossible to talk about pain. It is impossible to actually talk about pain. And do you think that it's actually impossible to actually express it, in as much as you've given us this film? There's still other things behind what we've seen. For example, the old man and his mutism. So that's my first question. And then secondly, I read a lot of books about the 2000 movement of writers who were writing about Rwanda. In 2000, people like Veronique Tadjo and a whole Tieno Monanembo, there was a whole team. They went to Rwanda and they wrote very engaging texts and novels about it. So perhaps there's a way that you can actually have a collaboration with other filmmakers. And it doesn't necessarily have to be Nigeria. It can also be Burundi and other places where you're getting child soldiers, right? And then you can team up, and that could be a festival, something very enriching. And I'm still going to come back to the graphic novels, because with Armenia and the genocide in Armenia, there are a lot of graphic novels that have been produced, and it's a different dimension. It's really a different dimension from, say, cartoons, documentary films, and the like. So please just consider it, because this lady who wrote Aya, she became very successful. It wasn't something like, it wasn't an issue that's historical, that's painful. It was actually something fun. The story of a 19-year-old girl and her troubles in the community and the like. So sometimes it doesn't have to be things that are painful, but it shows sort of feminism and different aspects of it. So I really love your film, and I really believe that you can take it further, because with Aya, it became a film, a huge film, and it's animated because it's from the graphic novel. So I wish you the best. I really wish you the best. And I have emailed you, and I'd love to talk more. Thank you.
Thanks, Cece. Thanks, everyone. Yes, I say it's a really good question about the burden of the stories we tell. I really feel strongly about it. And, I think Chimamanda really, in her speech about I want to get it right, the problem with a single story, something that's not exactly the title, but exactly about this, right? There are multiple stories a person can tell, and in a perfect world, we would have the freedom to tell all our stories. And we also live in a specific context. And I actually don't believe that any filmmaker must tell any single story. I think we need to create enough resources so that many different filmmakers can tell many different stories. And that, I think, deals with the real problem, which is that there are historical stories that need to be told, and there are stories of, humans doing human things that also deserve to be told. So I actually think that often it becomes a way of pitting one way of, creating with another, and that circumvents the real issue, which is, yes, about access and resources, and a more systemic problem that unfortunately we bear. So absolutely, I think about this often. What stories should I tell? There are many stories I would like to tell, and a film costs a certain amount of money, and then there's the real, then practical question of which one it will be, and it evolves over time. So again, I think, in a cinema that is still a cinematic history that's still nascent, which I think a lot of African cinema is, it makes sense that we want to deal with, what feel like the problems we feel on a large scale, because we tackle issues often in a story, and so I think it's a very organic process. And as more films get made, then there's space for more. I really see this in Nigerian literature. There are the Chinua Achebes and Wole Soyinkas of our time, and now I think there are quite a few Nigerian authors who are, I recently read My Sister the Serial Killer, which is very fun, poppy book set in Lagos. That's brilliantly written, but it's not, about, colonialism, for example. So that's my response to that question. And then, in terms of how I think it's a really good question about how, these films and stories can be, I don't remember exactly the phrasing, but how it resonates across the continent. I think that already happens. I mean, I know, for example, that, Ghanaian and Nollywood films travel. I mean, when I was in South Africa for 3 months, and I was amazed by how many South Africans watch Nollywood films. I think we understand that there are rhymes in our lives and we can feel that, there are similarities, and it feels good to see ourselves on screen, whether we're Nigerian or Rwandan, or Ethiopian. And I think, again, that ultimately we all feel emotion, and if an emotion, is captured on screen, in a way it transcends what village that emotion is felt. We know it. We know when it's true, and we know when it's true to our experience. So I think in really being true to the specificity of a moment, of a history, of a story, we allow access actually broadly to more people who I think truth is felt always, in essence. There was, sorry, I'm like forgetting all the questions that were asked. In responding to, yeah, there was one more that I really wanted to touch on.
Yeah, I was trying to remember the question myself and I got confused. It wasn't a sayings question, right?
No, it wasn't.
Was it the question about
I think
the 2000 movement? Was it the 2000 movement and bringing folks together?
Yeah, bringing folks together. I mean, look, again, that's the dream. I'm early in my career, and I really, for me, Pan-Africanism is a huge, huge desire. There are already a few things happening. There need to be more. And again, across countries, across media, I really believe in creating spaces where thinkers and artists from all across the continent and diaspora can come together and share work. I think that cross integration creates such exciting movement and thought. So again, it's the burden of the single maker, right? One can only do so much, and time will tell.
Wonderful. So we're going to take one more round. Please throw your hands up if you're ready to ask a question. We're going to start off by Dr. Chika, who has a question for us. Chika.
Please, Chair, you can take other people's questions. So I go only their space.
Please, Dr. Mba, please, I'm chairing. So please bring your question. Thank you.
Okay, okay, that's fine. Thanks a lot. Yeah, so Oliver was, okay, thanks for the excellent presentation and everything. So I was just maybe a slightly personal question about whether you have some Nollywood ambitions. A question I think maybe resonates with some that have been raised by others, especially as say. And if you do have that kind of ambition, am I sharing my screen by any chance? No. So what are the challenges? What have you done or tried to do? There's a bit of interest there. Then this one, I'm hoping I could make easy for myself and for you to understand. So I was just thinking in terms of how film, how the cinematic experience allows us to transcend or to connect the abstract or abstract thinking with material reality. So there is a handshake between abstraction and the real world out there. And there is this special thing that the cinematic experience of film and the art of filmmaking is able to do. So it allows us to live in that, is it an interstice between abstraction and reality, but simultaneously allows us to transcend that particular measure. It lets us into somehow film is able to do so many things all at once. And even though I scarcely have enough time to see films, to go to watch cinema, go to cinema, I often live in admiration of what filmmakers are able to do, because I think in a sense, writers, scholars, hope they're able to do this when they write and when maybe they get a chance to present their work. So I'll leave that there. Maybe there's something that comes to mind because I said that. And then my other question is particularly about your theme. From your presentation and the location of your film, the short page in history, it seems that you want to see filmmaking as therapeutic. Also because you are thinking of healing, generational trauma. So there is a handshake again between what goes on in the mind and historical experience. Are there particular moments in the film that you've just shown us that you think you were really, we are really thinking about this therapy in those moments? What informed those moments? And can you explain those moments in that short space? I don't know. I just want to hear more about what was going on in the mind of the author, in the mind of the maker of those moments, the creator of those moments. Maybe I should stop, but because I don't think I've got the language to say all I wanted to say, because I'm thinking of something meta, the metaphysics of particular moments in the general act of filmmaking in this particular context. That's what I've been thinking.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair, for insisting.
Thank you very much, Chika. C, please bring it at 30 seconds because we have to finish, and then go ahead and allow our presenter to speak. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Do you think having a black and white film would add another layer? If you had made it black and white, would it have added another layer? Would it hide or reveal more, since we're talking about the past? And then would you consider silent film? Especially for people who are visually people who are who can't hear. Would you consider that silent film? Because that'll be interesting, focusing more on body language. I think I'll leave it there. The other one is in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me just read the chats real quick, and then that way we can get everything together, okay? One message in the chat, black and white, okay. Silent, possibly. Interactive theater is another question. Would you do interactive theater and then film that? Okay, perfect. So go ahead and give us about a 2-minute wrap up, and then we're going to hand it back over to our convener of this seminar series. And before we do that, I just want to say congratulations on an amazing film, an amazing presentation, and you've really tackled some things that many of us wish we can tackle so eloquently, in our writing. So we're very grateful for you sort of coming and blessing us with this amazing art form. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll try to kind of cover everything that's been asked. I think the power of film is that it is a unity of different media. It's imagery, it's sound, it's drama, it's embodied people, and these all have their unique effects on the mind and the body of the individual who watches them. And so in that sense, it's an incredible tool, actually. The film was invented, as a scientific tool. It was invented to capture emotion and then to measure it. And that was taken and made into an art form for a reason. And I agree so much with Dr. Mjiba about its ability to take an abstraction and dramatize that, and then to employ these different mediums to create feeling in a person. And those things connected can be very powerful. There's a reason why, propaganda films were so popular in certain times. The Germans made so many propaganda films, the Nazis did, and the Americans have done, and people use it all the time because it has this psychological impact on us. And it similarly does that with, our pain. And so the way we made Troublemaker actually was in collaboration with the village. So I wrote the script and then got there and threw it away, and really was an improvisation between the non-actors who were, people from that village. The boys all lived there, the mother lived there, the grandfather lived there, who had their own lives and truths. And then really an improvisational technique that allowed us draw from their lives and tell the story. And I think you can really feel that in the scene. So when the grandfather, collapses on the floor and cries, I didn't tell him to go to the floor actually, and it was his own truth. And I think, he lived through the war and he had his own experience. And I think when he cries out, those are his own words that he chooses, and that's very meaningful. So again, it's this interplay of fact and fiction, of sound, of images, of history that becomes embodied, and humans respond to the embodied other, like reflected back at them. And these are choices you make. So I could have made the choice to make the film black and white, but I wanted really to preserve this place too. I've always thought the Nigerian countryside is so stunning, and yet there's so little representation of it. And I just wonder why, and that is an hour away from my village. And so I wanted an accurate representation of the place in color, vivid, the way I remember it and think of it. And it was really important to me to make the film in the local language and to have that language again preserved in this film. And now Troublemaker is the first Igbo language film to be on Criterion, which for me is very, meaningful. And so again, these are choices we make because ultimately these two are documents of the present, which will become history one day.
Wow, thank you so much. First of all, I know you all agree with me when you say this was an amazing presentation, and we are looking out for the more dynamic stuff that's going to be coming out. I think for me, the one thing that, and we have some virtual applause, the one thing I think that we will challenge you to do from the Institute of African Studies, particularly where we are, pushing for decolonization and Africanization of knowledge production, is to find a way to get these films more accessible to the continent, in particular, and global Africa in general. And we say global Africa because, we're talking Africans in Brazil and in Colombia and in, Nigeria and in, Britain and et cetera. And so we really would challenge you to negotiate with, distributors, producers, whomever, to really push that to our market on the continent. Because, and last thing before I hand it over to Dr. Mjiba, we need to use this dynamic material, documentary, shorts, full features, to really use as a way to push the masses forward to wherever they want to be. And unfortunately, the masses aren't in Colombia or different spaces. And so for talented filmmakers like you, we have to put that on your shoulders to bring it home. So thank you so much. I'm so grateful to have been able to moderate this. I learned a lot. Still not a filmmaker. I just happen to have made one film. Dr. Mjiba, back to you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Olive. Thank you, our virtual audience, for creating the time in this moment to attend one more virtual seminar. We don't take this for granted. We do appreciate. So we'll just stop recording, and then if people want to continue engaging a little bit for 1 minute, then we will end the entire proceeding.